So our next presenter is Leah Chang. So Leah is the founder of Leah Chang Learning, and she's going to be talking to us today about learning management systems and adopting puppies, I believe. Is that,
yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So Leah, please come up. Do you want to move that down that way a little bit?
Sure, yeah, okay, full disclosure, I'm very hot, haven't even started yet, so you're going to see me get even rosier, and it's fine. If I start breaking out in hives, let's just roll with it, okay? I might fan myself a bit. I used to be a high school teacher, and so I love analogies, because that's how I like to explain things. It helps me understand things, so I'm going to use the analogy of puppy adoption today. And we'll talk a little bit about why. So instead of saying systems adoption and user enablement, let's talk about okay. We're adopting a puppy together. Okay, so go on this journey with me. Who has adopted an animal from the CCA before? Anyone? Okay, great. Who has any kind of pet at all? Maybe you got a friend, a neighbor, family. Wonderful. Okay, I have 2 cats. Dogs are also great in my books, but I just happen to have 2 rescue cats, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about them today. And I like to use this analogy when I'm working with my clients who are mostly nonprofits, small, medium to large-ish size, that, hey, we're in this together. We're adopting a system, or we're implementing a system, whatever it may be. It could be a learning management system, it could be a CRM, but essentially we're going to be using it together, and we're going to be ensuring its longevity, sort of the same way that you would with a rescue animal. So if you're adopting a new animal, you need to learn how to take care of it, right? But not just today, you need to do that for the rest of its life. And so I really work with organizations to look at that long-term model of what I call staff adoption. And the world I live in has a lot to do with training. So I actually really think training is these days, so I stay away from what I call the T word. So I call it enablement, empowerment. Essentially, it's education. I prefer the E words. And what I do is I used to be an educator. I love to design learning, custom learning, instructor-led training, e-learning, blended learning, you name it. But I also love the systems that help deliver that. And so that's how I got into learning management systems. I'm just curious, does anyone here have a learning management system? Organization? Awesome. Who has no idea what I'm talking about? Okay. Oh. I'll talk a little bit about learning management systems today, but I also work with CRMs, which I call constituent relationship management systems. Sometimes they morph into content relationship management too. So how those things intersect, the Venn diagram about where all your tech stack meets or doesn't meet up, what Eric was describing. That's the stuff I like to help organizations with, along with the delivery and the ongoing plan to get staff using it and adopting the puppy together and keeping the puppy healthy and keeping it growing, etc. So here are a couple examples just to give you some context. So Pain BC is a client I worked with. They wanted to deliver an online course to train healthcare providers on the science of chronic pain foundations. So they needed a learning management system to deliver that to thousands of healthcare providers in the province. So what do they need? How are they going to do it? What kind of learning assets or courses would they have? So that's the kind of stuff that organizations use learning management systems. Another example is recently I worked with Technical Safety BC. And a lot of people haven't heard about them, but they're kind of like the equivalent of WorkSafe BC, except they keep the technical stuff safe. So like the gondolas, go skiing, that kind of stuff. They had a learning management system that had spiraled out of control. Does anyone know what I'm talking about when like you've come into an organization and you realize like, wow, no one has really taken care of this animal for a long time. The poor thing has mats, bleeding paws, its ears are all mangled, but it's a good puppy, you know, it's a loving puppy. It does all the things you need it to do. It's just no one really took care of it. So in this case, we identified that they needed to migrate to a new system, and because of technical requirements and data sovereignty, blah, blah, blah. One of the Canadian learning management systems matched them with was Absorb. They're based in Canada. So I'm just curious, does anyone here know that if their organization has data sovereignty restrictions, like that your stuff has to live in Canada? Yeah, it's very common. So this is, a lot of people are in the same boat. So just really quickly, my tech values are really based on that education background. So I like to enable people to be their own data masters, and there's a lot of baby Yodas going around these days, but like growing them from the baby Yoda to the older Yoda, and also talking about that single source of truth, that concept of information should be accessible, living and breathing, and that is a really new concept for a lot of nonprofit organizations, especially the small ones, or especially those that have been run by, the older generation of like the ladies who have tea, like Ridge, and like a lot of the organizations that I work with have an older population of stakeholders running the operations. So how do you float these new ideas that information is living and breathing and lives on something called the cloud? Right? So these are things that sort of drive all of the training and all of the educational pieces we deliver. And you're going to walk away with some of these today too. So I also talk a lot about, we talk about user experience, but I like to think about who will be administrating this system. Who's the super user? Who are like the less superish users? And a lot of organizations don't have a structure for their administrative backend. I'm curious, is anyone here, are you the super user of any of the systems? Yeah. Ooh, the power. Ooh. Are any of you sort of like a semi-god or a demigod user? Yeah. Okay. Oh, the lesser power, but still good. So these are things that a lot of organizations, big and small, haven't really thought about. Sort of to Jai's point about having a digital strategy, having an administrative hierarchy, and setting your team up for success. Not just like in the fresh, cute puppy stage, but as the puppy ages and maybe starts getting diabetes and might need a little bit of treatment down the road. So you can see how this analogy can be helpful to think about the longevity of your system and how it will be operationalized for many years to come. Nope, I'm going backwards. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about numbers today. So I'm going to share 3 case studies. I'm going to give you 5 techniques that I have tried and that they worked out pretty good, so I thought I'd pass them on to you. And I'm going to leave you with a bunch of stuff today, so after the session, I can email it out to everyone. And please use these freely. Like as a teacher, I was always like, share my resources, please. If you can improve on them, awesome. Let me know how they go, right? So I want to give you something away that you can use right away with your organization. Okay, 3 case studies. I'm not going to say exactly who was what and who did where. We're not airing dirty laundry here, but these are some really exciting groups I've had a chance to work with recently. Options for Sexual Health, British Columbia. Anyone heard of them? Okay, awesome. Arts Council of New Westminster, a very small group, but one of the longest arts councils in the province. And Foundry BC, which is a provincial nonprofit under the umbrella of Providence Health. They support youth with mental health issues, and they're running sort of a health center in different parts of BC. So lots of different shapes and sizes, different mandates, but here's their story. The first organization, they had a problem. And their problem was, help, our LMS is about to explode. Those were their exact words. And I said, well, what do you mean? Is there a fire? Like, what's going on? Turns out they needed some help because they had an open source system that housed their volunteer program and their education training program. And it hadn't been updated in probably more than 5 or 6 years. And they had never had proper training on it, so they didn't know how to do that. But it wasn't costing them anything, so they just let it go. You can see how that puppy was very neglected after this. So the unknowns were, they didn't know what was living in it. They didn't know if there was any useful data in it, and they had no idea how much it would cost to move to something else or to scrap it. They just didn't know where to start. And here's what worked. What we did was an analysis. We looked at what are we using it for, what's in there. We grabbed all the inventory. We looked at any data we could. And we also looked at their use cases. What are you actually using? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Oh, you're only using it for these 2 things instead of these 70 things you could do. And thanks to that analysis, we were able to identify like, oh, staff have never been trained on how to use it, so that's why we don't have any data. For example, instead of creating new courses every time they had a new volunteer intake, they would just delete the ones in there and put new ones in. So yeah, I see some people frowning. So which meant that they didn't have any of their past data, and that's actually pretty common with organizations. They're just doing the best they can, right? It's not their fault. They've never really learned how to create a new course, enter new learners into that course, and then. So, long story short, we identified like, okay, moving forward, here's what you need. We were able to write a grant together, meet the deadline, and now we're waiting for the money. And once we get that, we're going to be able to put together a different flow system and set them up for success so that they don't have to worry about, gee, how do I update this? Is our security up to date? What do we do? So in this case, we recommended an out-of-the-box solution for that instead of an open source. Because this organization was very lean internal administrators and IT support. I see some nods, so some people are like, yeah, that's kind of the boat we're in. Okay, so that's case number 1. Case number 2, really similar, I think, to what Eric was talking about. And this organization is quite small, but they're very, very high on that scale of digital adoption. They have too many tools. They grabbed anything free. They are like TechSoup's best clients. They downloaded everything, and they're using like 20 different tools. They're still using 10 tools because what they realized is, oh yeah, they know they needed something called a CRM. Okay, so they bought something. Okay, they had a student intern set it up. Okay, and then they tried to use it for membership. All right. Oh, but we still need to enter everything manually into QuickBooks. Okay, so it's not actually helpful. So in this case, it's a group that has only 1 full-time staff and a few part-time staff. And they're overwhelmed by all the different tools. So it's high on the tech adoption, but very low on the knowledge and usability. So in this case, they chose eTapestry. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Blackbaud CRM products. Razor's Edge is the big one. eTapestry is sort of like pared down. eTapestry does all the things you want a CRM to do. But if you don't know what these things mean, then it isn't really helpful. Like, this group wouldn't have known what analytics and data environment. Oh, that sounds good. They didn't know what multi-channel fundraising was. Like, none of these things mean anything to them. So I like the jargon giraffe. I think a lot of nonprofits feel, I don't want to say bullied, because that's a very strong word, but sometimes it's hard to ask about things that you don't know about. In this case, the executive director is just doing the best that he or she can, right? And so in the end, they needed someone to translate between the vendor and their staff, their users, to actually figure out, like, how can we use this? How can we integrate it? What does this replace? And so a question we're looking at still with this group is, when do you need QuickBooks and when can we avoid using it? We want to take away the administrative. And so here's what worked. We sat down with them as a group. We started from the very beginning to spread awareness and did some, we call it training, very carefully, training with the staff. This is a staff that had very high social skills, excellent community outreach, people skills. They had not been hired for their digital. But as this organization is scaling up and moving towards more digital maturity, we have to get the staff on board too. And people are capable of it, but they need to be supported. And in the learning world, we call that scaffolded. So my tidbit for you today, one of the biggest takeaways is do not wait till the end of an implementation project. Always start by getting staff, getting internal users up and running. The concept of what is this thing, right? So start to bring them into the conversations, get their input, show them what it looks like, and start kind of downloading all that information they have about their portfolio or whatever it is they do in the organization, especially the executive director. And as a team, start making those decisions together. I'll give you some examples. So the executive director has been working there for years, knows everybody personally, has a million things in his head. We just wanted to start downloading that. So instead of doing that offline, we did it as a group. We asked for some sample data, and I showed them what a custom field was and how it could be used and how it could be applied to a workflow and to a web form, and they're like, oh, that's what a CRM is. So when you get those aha moments, you really start to get more buy-in. And we did this on a regular basis, so it could be once a week, it could be once every 2 weeks, but if you call them working meetings, then you're not calling them the terrible T word of training. People take it very differently, right? And we started creating I want to call it a custom knowledge base, like all of the great vendors of any system, tons of info. You don't need to redo that, but for staff who've never used a system before, that's intimidating to go to a knowledge base. They don't even know what to type in, like what do I call this thing I'm trying to do? So sometimes they need a little bit of translation there, and that's where a knowledge transfer person. And so we personalized it. We called the thing, whatever it is they named their thing, right? If the custom fields don't match up exactly, sometimes your brain doesn't make that connection. And here I'm going to give you an example of one of the slides I used to facilitate these team working meetings. So instead of telling people what they're going to do with the CRM and what the CRM will do for them, we talked about it together. We actually brought in some pie, and we cut up a pie, and we're like, okay, let's talk about this. So what are some functions that everyone sort of deals with in the organization, and how can we sort of parcel this out or piece it out? It turns out the organization was really relying on one person. The executive director was actually doing all of these functions. So not only were we talking about how to use the CRM better, but we also helped support them with the operations of hey, let's share the load. Let's take care of the puppy together. So I'm going to give you a little sample of some of these. I call them worksheets because I was a teacher, but you can call them whatever you like. They're job aids, they're collaborative documents. Please change whatever you want on them. They're just ideas for collaborative discussion. So that's one of the examples. And some of them look like this. So we did Lingo Bingo. There's so much jargon when you work with each system, right? Salesforce has its own jargon. Each learning management system calls what's a course, what's a module, what's a unit? There are 20 definitions of the word module, right? So anyway, you can do lots of these things with your group. And Eli will help me email everyone all the slides as well. But I tend to use a lot of videos that are made for corporations. They talk about the bottom line, your sales funnel. And if you show that kind of stuff to nonprofit crowd, it really doesn't sit well, doesn't jive well. However, the concepts are good, right? So I use a lot of translation pieces, such as, okay, we're going to talk about CRM, but do you know where CRMs come from? They come from the world of sales and retail, right? And you tell that story, and you say, this is how we can use it for community outreach. If you make that connection very explicit, it really helps for them to get buy-in. Then you can use those corporate training videos and talk about CRMs in a very sales funnily way, right? Anyway, you get the idea. But I'm happy to give these to you. Please use them freely. Last story. How am I doing for time? Oh, I'm good. Okay, so I'm with a group right now. They're very large and extremely adept at technology. But we realized early on, nobody knew what a CRM was, what it actually meant. People have been talking about the CRM project for months. And it's obvious that they didn't actually spend the time discussing what a CRM would do or help them with. And so we sensed a lot of resistance. People were like, this is going to be so much. Why do we have another system? And the history of this particular nonprofit was they had so many systems that they were already using. They just didn't want to have one more. They had reached change saturation, right? Which is pretty common nowadays. So we took a step back. And this is going to seem really elemental, but this is like the most powerful thing I've done recently, and I highly recommend it. Here's what worked. Instead of calling it a CRM, we tapped into the organization's culture. So for whatever reason, this particular group names everything with an F word. And they riff off of movies that they like. So everything is called something like, I don't know, they had Freaky Friday. They called one of their projects Freaky Friday, right? Or they have, give me another movie. You know. Sorry? Yeah, Fargo. Ooh, yeah, ooh. Yeah, so they have this fun internal culture, right? They also really love dogs. They have these therapy dogs that come in and like cuddle with people during the day. It's really interesting, right? So anyway, we got to know this group, and this is what made that connection. It's a cognitive connection that it seems so simple, but unless people start calling this system something that they own or that they bought into, they don't really care. Like CRM, oh, whatever that means, right? So you can train them on what a CRM does, an LMS or whatever, but really if they don't start making it their own from the very beginning, it's a hard leap, right? So here's what we did. We came up with some very precise names with lots of significance and metaphor and a lot of, symbolism. We kind of knew which one they would pick, but we crowdsourced and we put a bunch of polls up, and we, had fun. We had posters up in the office and that kind of. So here are the 5 names or 6 names we offered. So Fortuna, Y, Ferris, Phantasma, Formosa, and Ferdinand. And this group is very, inclusive. Diversity is very important, so we made sure we had neutral terms. We made sure that we played off of the movie theme, right? So guess which one they picked for their CRM, which is Salesforce. Curious. Fortuna. Who thinks they picked Fortuna? Okay, that wasn't very popular. Ferris. All right. Phantasma. Oh yeah. Formosa. Yeah. Ferdinand. I love Ferdinand too. They picked Ferris. And I think it's because they're a provincial nonprofit, but they have multiple centers. And they're going to be using the CRM internal data between the corporate group and the centers. And so Ferris made the most sense. And you know what? This was a beautiful process because they came up with all the reasons themselves. And they started riffing off the analogy, and now it's like this big joke. So no one calls it the CRM project anymore. It's now Project Ferris, or we just call it Ferris. And it has a living, breathing identity. And so now we want to keep Ferris alive, right? So anyway, these are the 3 things that have worked for me. Happy to share more stories, but the 5 ways that I enable groups with the power of these other wonderful partners. Once you've picked the right tool, how do you get staff to adopt it? And try to think of the E words: enablement, empowerment, education, instead of the terrible T word, training. And these are the things that always work for me as an educator. Like, never assume people know what you're talking about. Because I don't. I mean, I was the embarrassed person sometimes who's like, I don't know what that means. But like, always explain what the system does and what it does, or what you'd like it to. I discovered the other day the executive director of an organization is like, we need an LMS. And it turns out they don't know what an LMS does. So I'm really asking questions like, are you sure? What do you want to do with it? And those are very fruitful, right? Always support learning and development throughout the whole stage of any tech project. Don't just wait till the end. That we see a lot of. I know a lot of implementation groups, like there's some really good ones out there. They will provide training, but it's like a one and done thing at the very end. That's not enough for you to maintain the health of your puppy for many years to come. You need to do constant. And you need to also build that into onboarding. That's when someone like myself, an education consultant. And then finally, like, download as much as you can from the executive director's brain. Like, you need to build in direct access to that person, whoever that person is. It's usually because they know everything, but they just haven't had time into something, right? So whatever that is, like going on walks with them, going for coffee, or walking with them between meetings, just download as much as you can, and then get someone to enter that data. And then finally, this has been a life changer for me, but you can use corporate learning resources or corporate materials, but you have to make that translation piece. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. Because what we do in nonprofits is so much more important. We have to be leaner and meaner and more agile with less budget, but we're doing more important. So anyway, I'll leave you with that. Today I'm going to give you a bunch of slides I use with my clients to talk about these concepts, and worksheets and some other fun things. You know, I'm still a teacher underneath it all, and you'll even find some videos and stuff in there. So if you would like to chat more about how to impact your nonprofit or other groups, and why these things are important, happy to talk more, but I love to work in the world of LMSs and CRMs. And I think that's my time, right? Can I do one shameless plug? Okay.
You can do two.
Okay, so I'm going to leave you with one question, which is, how will you, and whatever role you play in your organization, how will you help adopt the puppy, but also keep the puppy alive for many, many years? Or, in my case, I've rescued 2 cats, and one of them is very challenging because a rescue cat that was abandoned, needs some special love and attention. So, like, if you already have a system that has been neglected, how do you rescue it? And the same concept. So, ask yourself that question, take that back to your organization, and use the analogy if it does help to make it a entity. Okay, here's my shameless plug. I'm all about learning. I'm going to a conference this year and leading a Canadian delegation. It's for organizational development, or we call training and development. But anyway, if anyone in your organization would like to go, this is a cheaper way to attend because I'm all about making it accessible in the industry. So ATD is the Association for Talent Development. It's a big one. It's expensive. So I was like, I'm volunteering in this position because I just want to share the opportunity. Please check out my LinkedIn, and I have a blog. And thank you for listening.